Biological Cemetery in 2011 and a concentration in pastoral care. He believes that the Jewish world is best served one-on-one, and inspiration comes not just from the pulpit, but from speaking truth, being a mensch, and recognizing the divine spark, the holiness in each one of us. Rabbi Weintraub is married to Rebecca, who makes him a better human being on a daily basis. Together, they are the proud parents of 2 amazing daughters and 1 crazy dog. Rabbi.
So first of all, it's wonderful to be here. What are we doing here? Why are we talking as a Jewish community specifically about refugee issues? Why is it that the Jewish community has a history, not just for hundreds of years, but for thousands of years of supporting those in need? So I wanted to share with you this chart. This logo comes originally from HIAS, the Hebrew or formerly the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, now just HIAS, which for over 100 years has been supporting and welcoming refugees from all around the world. Their mission initially was focused on the Jewish community and bringing Jews over after the pogroms in Russia, and then all the way up to the Soviet Jews in recent years. And in the last 20 years, they've really worked hard to expand that work and to bring people to safer environments from wherever to wherever they needed to be. So why do we do that? The very first thing is Hachnasat Orchim, that we as Jews are told to welcome guests, to welcome the stranger. We are told, that we need to remember to love the stranger, for you were strangers. That we, and it's very interesting the language we use, because we might have said, oh, we were slaves in Egypt. But no, we acknowledge that, but the language we use repeatedly is that we were strangers in Egypt, and that initially they welcomed us. And there's a debate in Bava Metzia in the Talmud. Rabbi Eliezer says that it is 36 times that the Torah warns us against mistreating a ger, mistreating a stranger. And others say it is 46 times. And the ger in Hebrew is sometimes used as the sojourner, sometimes the stranger, sometimes the alien, sometimes the resident alien. When it is a ger toshav, it becomes a convert. But however we use the ger, it often is a migrant, of somebody who had to leave one place to find themselves in another. And that could be, an economic migrant. It could be a migrant because of oppression or asylum, or a very multiple different possibilities. But all of them come back to the same principle again and again and again, that we need to remember the experience that we had and to use that to create empathy and to build a better world. That we are to emulate God, as it says in Deuteronomy, for God is supreme. Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei haElohim. God is supreme over all. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibur V'Hanora, language from the Midah, supreme, great, mighty, awesome, who does not show favor, who does not take a bribe. Oseh Mishpat, who does justice for the Yatum, the Almanah, who does the widow and the orphan, and supports and cares for Ohev Ger, supports the migrant. Latet lo lechem v'simla, and gives the migrant clothing and food. And that we are to v'ahavtem, we are to love, to befriend, to care for Hager, to befriend the migrant. Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because we were migrants in the land of Egypt. Now, Hayas also speaks about justice, tzedek. We have, as a Jewish community, a mission, a requirement, a vision that we support justice. And justice is not something that just happens. tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. We have to run after it. We have to pursue it, to go after it. And whenever we see in the Torah language that is repeated, a verb twice, it's to show emphasis. So tzedek, tzedek means we really have to go after this. This is vital and important. There's an understanding of chesed, of compassion, that we need to care for people. You don't show up to somebody to support them and do this in an unkind way. You don't look down upon the people that you are assisting. We're not better than anybody else. We have had different opportunities. And our tradition is saying, if you're in the position to help, you help. And this is something we do not alone, but with Havruta, with a partnership, working together. This is, Gulf Coast. One of the beautiful things is, yes, this is the Jewish Family Services, but it's not just for Jews. Gulf Coast has worked all across our state, starting, founded in our area, but by our Jewish community, but does tremendous work for everyone throughout the state of Florida. And their holy work is rooted in the values of the Jewish community, but is not and never has been limited to supporting the Jewish community. It has always been focused on caring for all who are in need. Now, the challenge is this is not work for the feeble-hearted. You can't just say, oh, I want to help. You have to put the effort in. You need chizuk, you need strength, you need koach, and you need ometz. You need courage, you need conviction to ensure that you are doing things with strength of character, knowing, as Hillel said, that, if we are not for ourselves, who will be for us? But if we are only for ourselves, who are we? And then the concluding sentence is, im ematai, if not now, when? And so we cannot simply say, this is someone else's problem. It may happen, we can push it off and let someone else deal with it sometime in the future. No, as a Jewish community, we remember that that text that 36 times, 36 also an important number in our tradition. We have to share love for those who need, and to care for them, and to support them, and to help them build a life. We, in our own history, I don't think there is a Jewish family in this country that doesn't have a story, whether it is one generation away, whether it is 2 generations away, whether it is 5 generations away, or even 10 generations away. We all left somewhere, and oftentimes it was not entirely of free will. Now you can say, oh, we left for a better opportunity. But if there were no opportunities where we were before, if it was not safe for us to live as Jews where we were before, that's not entirely of free will. That was, we had a need to leave a situation that was not great, was not safe, was not wonderful. My family came over to this country after pogroms. They came over in in waves and trickles in the 1870s and the 1880s and the 1890s, the first beginning of the 1900s. But they came because the place where they had lived could no longer be home for them. And the place that welcomed them was this country. And they were very happy to be in the United States and to have the opportunities and the privileges and to be able to be a citizen and to vote in this country. But all of that came from this Jewish value. all of this came, we have to remember today, we were strangers. We were strangers right here in this country, in the United States of America. And now we have found our way. How do we ensure, that next generation? And there's a very powerful text, in our tradition over and over again in our Torah. It says, we have one law for the migrant and for the citizen. We have one law for the immigrant. We make sure that they have the potential to live a fair and just life. And one of the things that we talk about is on, emulating the practices of the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that as God visited the sick, we visit the sick. As God clothed the naked, we clothe the naked. As God feeds the hungry, we feed the hungry. One of the things that God does, according to the book of Jeremiah, Kol mar Adonai asu mishpat utzedakah. Thus said God, Kol Amar, do what is just and what is right. V'hatzilu gazol miyad asok. Rescue from the defrauder those who is robbed. V'ger yatom v'almana al tanu al tachzemu. Don't wrong the migrant, the fatherless, the widow. V'dam naki al tishpechu b'makom hazeh. And don't shed the blood of the innocent. So we are commanded, according to Jewish tradition, to emulate God, and God demonstrates to us that God cared for the stranger and welcomed the stranger, and we have to remember that we were the stranger. We were welcomed, not always easily and not always perfectly, but we have been welcomed, and we need to continue that welcome for the next generation. And I have just been warned that my time is up, so I will stop there. But this is a conversation that we can teach entire semesters or years of college study just on what it means to welcome the stranger. So thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was wonderful. Next up, Sylvia Acevedo is the Senior Director at Gulf Coast JFCS of Refugee and Employment Services. She has over 25 years of nonprofit leadership, dedicating much of her focus on developing and overseeing programs that address the needs of the vulnerable and the marginalized populations. In her current role, she provides direction and oversight to a full continuum of refugee and employment programs within the state of Florida and 6 counties. Sylvia?
Thank you, Cindy, for the introduction. And Rabbi Weintraub, thank you for such a powerful presentation and for sharing that. Yep, we were all strangers. I can see the PowerPoint. Yep, perfect. So you're seeing local numbers. And if you look to the far right of your screen, you're going to see what we did, the number of people we resettled last year. And the number that we resettled just October, just November, and just December. And we're not even done with December. We're at 125 humans, from Afghanistan who were able to evacuate. So we in turn had to really move quickly to accommodate the fast changing situation, and the communications started around, right as the Afghans were evacuating from Afghanistan. So Hayes approached us immediately and asked, could we step up to help resettle individuals? There was a lot of, since it was so fast changing, they hadn't even had a category for what immigration category would these people have, because many of them served as interpreters for the US military or contractors, but they hadn't been able to process their special immigrant visas. They had no time. It was a quick evacuation. So the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, like on the fly, created a special humanitarian parole, and the State Department a program to provide services, sort of I call it the fraternal twin of the refugee resettlement program that we have been running at the agency. And then some other federal partners stepped in and vowed to really expedite, some asylum applications, some documents that, anyone coming to this country would need so that they could become self-sufficient. So with this new program, we were asked to resettle 250 plus. That number keeps changing. It's a number that keeps moving. Individuals just from Afghanistan. And to consider opening a new site in where we had a footprint in Northport, Sarasota County. And to consider remote placement in Miami, where we have the Florida Center for Survivors of Torture working with refugees. So they wanted anyone that had some capacity and understood refugees to, to really create, open and expand our programming. So, that number has increased for the entire United States. It isn't just Gulf Coast JFCS. It has increased 125,000 refugees. So we're not even talking about the Afghan humanitarian parolees. We're not even talking about refugees. They fall under a different category. So 125,000 refugees for the current fiscal year, plus 100,000 Afghan humanitarian parolees. That number keeps changing too. The last number I heard was 70,000. Another 25,000 are in Germany. They're calling those the lily pads. And then the 8 military installations that are processing Afghan refugees that left Afghanistan and they went to these 8 military installations, those are called safe havens. So, there's going to be a new evacuation from Germany to the safe haven. So that's why that number changes. If you compare it to previous year, what's that, 225,000. If you compare it to the previous year, only 15,000 were approved, and actually only 11,411 arrived in the previous fiscal year, and that's, according to the State Department, the lowest number in 40 years. And that had to do in part because 5 months into the fiscal year, COVID hit and the program paused. August came, and as I mentioned, we moved very quickly to respond to the growing desire to the crisis. And there was a couple of things that, as it was unfolding before your eyes, the community was calling. And I'm not surprised after hearing, Rabbi Weintraub's presentation and how welcoming the stranger is enshrined in Jewish text. So I'm not surprised why we received such an outpouring from the Jewish community to help, to get involved, to support. So our amazing development department quickly moved to create tools on our website to help self-direct people that wanted to help. Some wanted to volunteer. Some wanted to donate a thing, maybe bed sheets for kids or for a family. And some wanted to donate funds. So they moved really, really quickly. Also, the media was very interested in what was happening in Afghanistan and in our local community. So all of the major news networks, we interviewed with them and spoke to them. And of course, like any news outlet, they really wanted to also interview a newly arrived Afghan family. But, for safety reasons and lots of concerns that we had, that these folks that made it here left family behind. And, while something on the internet could live forever, something on the internet could live forever and could be shared, even in Afghanistan. So we really protected our clients, and even though there was lots of sort of follow-ups from media wanting to hear directly from someone impacted, we as an agency, we really guarded those individuals and kept us as the main point of contact. Let me see what else has happened. This is sort of a briefing and it's exciting to talk about it. Through the website that development created, a lot of donations started coming. We rented a storage unit. We've also hired we needed to immediately hire a housing and resource coordinator, because the biggest issue, particularly here in the Tampa Bay area, where we have seen the price of housing go up, and we hired a housing coordinator, additional staff. And we're using some technology to create efficiencies, because there are so many coming in such a short amount of time. And I'll give you an example. We're required when someone arrives to make sure that they have a culturally appropriate meal to eat. So now maybe we might order it through Uber Eats, so that meal gets to them, is culturally appropriate, and then we'll inform them that the food was left on their doorstep. It used to be my staff would have to go to a store, buy the food, drive it to the client. But with all of the fast moving, changing numbers, we have used some efficiencies. Groceries, our staff used to purchase groceries at the store. Now we're having like Walmart deliver the groceries, or whatever store we purchase from. So those are some of the efficiencies that we've had to put into place. We're holding info sessions. If you have anyone interested in volunteering, we have an info session every Monday at noon. And if anyone is interested in offering any kind of housing solution, that could be short-term, long-term, we have a housing info session at 3 o'clock every Monday, and I can share that in the chat. So I'll talk a little bit later about the work, specifically get into the nitty-gritty about the work that we do. But I wanted to, if you go to the next slide, Cindy, or whoever's, yeah. So we continue to resettle refugees from all over the globe. And I love this picture. This was from an event that we had, a community event. And here you have someone from the Democratic Republic of Congo, someone from Russia, someone from Cuba, and someone, a Holocaust survivor from Poland. And that's the true picture of Gulf Coast. We resettle refugees from all over the world. But now we're responding to the most recent crisis, which is the resettling of Afghan evacuees. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you some of the things that we've learned early on is that some of the characteristics in one household, right? So these individuals that are being resettled are very different. For one, refugees go through a process of actively leaving their country through their own desire. They're forced to leave, but they make that decision. They have to cross an internationally recognized border to be considered a refugee, and they have to meet one of the 5 grounds of admissibility. They usually wait in a refugee camp like you see on the right for long periods, or become what they call urban refugees. That could be at a minimum 3 years up to 20 years in a camp. What happened in Afghanistan? Somebody was working one day, owning a home, driving a car, working for the US military, and overnight they heard that they had a chance to get on a flight out of Afghanistan. No time to sell property, no time to sell their vehicles, no time to prepare. And so it was very abrupt, and they didn't go through the active process of seeking refugee status. They were thrusted into the situation because of their affiliation with the US military. And so we're noticing, and Dr. Silverman, I hope that you can speak to some of this, some characteristics that are like, for example, multi-literacy literacy levels in one household. So you might have the person that worked for the US military who's completely fluent in English, whereas you have the household members not at all understand English. And also interfamily cultural differences. So if the person was an interpreter for the US military, he might be a very modern presenting shaved man. And then when you look at the household, incredibly traditional. So I'm gonna hand it off to Cindy to introduce Dr. Silverman, because I'm curious and I want to hear more from you and take in as much as possible, because there's a lot to be learned. Thank you.
Okay, right before Dr. Silverman speaks, we wanted to do a really brief poll to see how you heard about this evening, just so we know how effective our getting this word out on a very short notice was. Anna, did you want to put the poll? There you go.
Oh, that's exciting. So far, 40%, 50% have voted. It's moving. 61 have voted. And it seems to have slowed down 70%, 72, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And it's kind of all leaning towards, you want to reveal the results, share those results with the group?
Okay, so most of you heard about it through us, and I don't know if it was necessarily through our own outreach or a lot of word of mouth. I know several of us kept sharing it out into our various Facebook groups and email groups. But I'm really, really glad that you did hear about it from us, from your place of worship, word of mouth, and from the federations. We went to both federations before we decided to do this to ask them if they would support and promote and co-sponsor this, and they both agreed quickly, and it was at the top of their e-blast, and they were very patient. We got them the e-blast pretty much a few hours before they had to send it, so it was a great partnership that happened very quickly. All right, so before, okay, stop sharing. Okay. So our next speaker is Dr. Adam Silverman, and Adam grew up here in Tampa. He said he went to Rodef Shalom, but he doesn't necessarily want to have us talk too much about that. Since 2015, he is the technical lead and consulting subject matter expert with Helios Global. Prior to this, Dr. Silverman has had several positions working with and for the military, including, and I'm going to read these specifically. I understand that it's very specific when you work for the Army. He was a senior fellow for the Center of Special Operations Study and Research, Joint Special Operations University with U.S. Special Operations Command. Prior to that, he was a cultural advisor to the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Europe, assigned by the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Security Dialogue in the Middle East. He was a cultural advisor to the Commanding General of 3 Corps. I'm not sure what that, okay, I'm not sure I can read my own writing. Cultural advisor to the Commandant of the U.S. Army War College, and cultural advisor to the Commander, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Armored Division, including deploying to Iraq in 2008. So we have quite the cultural expert with us tonight. There's a cultural fellow here to talk a little bit about what some of our clients are going through at this time. And if you're going to be working with volunteering with these families, some of the things that you might want to understand. Dr. Silverman?
Thank you for that introduction. I'm off mute. Good. Okay. So I just want to start and basically frame this a little bit. During my time deployed in Iraq, I worked with the brigade, with our USAID reps, who handle these things, dealing with internally displaced Iraqis, dealing with some folks that were looking for refugee status, trying to get out of Iraq, things of that nature. And I just want to make it very clear, no one grabs whatever they can carry on their back, their kids, or hands their kids and some supplies off to somebody else that they trust and sends them hundreds or thousands of miles over land or over the water, right? Just for giggles, right? Especially to come to the US. They do it either because of what they know of the US in the post-World War II period over the past almost 80 years now, or because they've worked with us or have seen us operate in various places, not just militarily, but diplomatically, developmentally, public health initiatives and things like that. And what they see, whether it's at a consulate or an embassy, or it's at a military checkpoint, is they see the American flag. And to them, to us, it's the Stars and Stripes, it's the Star Spangled Banner, it's Old Glory. To them, it's safety, it's hope, it's freedom, it's a chance. So I think that's important to keep in mind when you think about whether it's the Afghan folks coming or other folks coming that you might be volunteering to help with, right? They're not, even if it's because I'm going because I have to be able to feed my children and I can't do it here, they're not doing it because things are necessarily okay where they are. I can also tell you from experience working with the Iraqi equivalents of these folks from Afghanistan, that they are lifesavers to us when we go and have to operate in these countries, whether it's to liberate, a decision's been made to liberate them, they've asked for our help, we're pursuing our own objectives that we think would be beneficial to them, regardless of what it is, right? It's very important that when they partner with us, right? We cannot do our jobs without the interpreters, because even if you spent all your time and all your money in prep, you couldn't make US military personnel functional enough in the host country language or languages before they deploy, you know, to be able to have an developed within our own structures language capacity that's broad and deep enough to operate. The same thing with the translators, the same thing with local contacts who will make arrangements for us, local security officials, what have you. Every time they partner with us, every time they're willing to go to work for us, it's not just for a paycheck, right? The paycheck may be important to them, but what's also important is that we're there to try to do something positive, or they think we are, and they're placing a bet on us that we're either going to do it, or if we try to do it and we fall short in some way, we'll make sure they're brought to safety on the back end, right? So I think that's important to keep in mind. Now let me sort of jump into the meat of this, if you will, which is just to briefly take a look at the ethnic map of Afghanistan. So you can see Afghanistan is geographically large, right? It runs all the way from the eastern border of Iran all the way out to the western border of China. And it is incredibly diverse. It has a huge number of different ethno-national and ethno-linguistic kinship groups within the Afghan population, right? Now, of course, we're all familiar with the Pashto. It's the largest group. The Taliban are from that community, so they get a lot of publicity. Some of you may be familiar with the Tajiks because of the Masood family and the Panjshiri, who have long resisted the Taliban. And things like that. Those are the two largest groups, but there's another half dozen to dozen smaller groups, you know, scattered throughout. And so the reality of it is that there's a lot of diversity there, and you're not necessarily going to know who you're going to get in a refugee situation. It makes it hard to, if you will, sort of create a standard typology of the ethno-national, ethno-linguistic, and even religious dynamics of the people that we're trying to help are. So for instance, you know, the vast majority of Afghans are Sunni Muslims of various types, but there's a significant Shia minority religious population amongst the sort of ethno-national, ethno-linguistic Persians or Dari speakers amongst the Afghans. Next slide, please. One of the other things that you'll often see or hear about Afghan kinship groups is that it's tribal. It's not really tribal, especially for the Pashto, which is where the term gets applied. So for instance, if you look on as you're facing the screen, if you look on the left of the screen where it says Iraqi Arab tribes, it's a very linear, organized kinship dynamic, right? Basically, I could zoom in on any of those branches of the kinship chart there, right? And figure out very quickly and very easily who has authority that if I go talk to them, I may have better luck getting a result, right? Amongst the Pashto, but also some of the other Afghan ethno-national groups. And if we turn this into a human geography lesson on Afghanistan, we'll be here for days. So we're going to try to avoid that, right? It's not very tribal, right? It looks kind of like spin art from when you were a kid, right? Or when I was a kid. You know, it's all over the place. It's not clear who you can reach out and touch that has the authority, who has the ability to make decisions. It's a very messy, if you will, and I don't mean messy in a pejorative sense, but it's not neat like the Iraqi one in the diagram next to it. It's a kind of a messy kinship dynamic. Next slide, please. Whoop, we're missing a slide. Nope. There we go. So this is going to let me get into sort of the meat of Sylvia's question, right? There are a couple of things I want to emphasize here real quick and then get out so that there's time for questions and answers and things like that. The first is Afghanistan is a differentially socially organized society. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that as a result of their history, especially their recent history over the past 40 or 50 years, Afghans have organized themselves, Afghanis have organized, excuse me, the various groups within Afghanistan have organized themselves to be able to survive the political and social and economic and religious structures that exist in the country, right? It's important to remember that for pretty much everybody you're going to be dealing with that we're trying to help in this refugee population from Afghanistan that has been brought out over the past couple of months and is slowly being integrated into American society, right? Is there's almost none of them that have been alive that remember a time when Afghanistan has not been involved in some form of either external war or interstate war or internal civil war, right? Going back to the mid to the late 70s with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, then you have, you know, the US and other NATO and European powers, as well as the Saudis and some others, funded the Mujahideen to create a domestic sort of counterinsurgency, if you will, or counter rebellion against the Soviets. That then evolves into the Taliban and Al Qaeda. You have the takeover of significant portions of the country. Then 9/11, you eventually get to 9/11, and then we and our NATO allies invade to deal with the fall, you know, as a response and part of the fallout from the 9/11 attacks. And then we've been there, you know, we were there for 20 years, right? So we're talking about a very long period of time where almost nobody who you're going to be dealing with hasn't been living in a country that hasn't been at war. And it's been at war directly, right? The US has been at war, well, just in the most recent period for 20 years. In Afghanistan and just under that in Iraq and in parts of Syria now, or the border area, if you will, right? But the reality is we're not fighting at home, so it doesn't affect us the same way. So you're dealing with a population that's had to organize themselves to survive all of that dynamic, including the Taliban takeover, you know, the constant state of this question of, you know, where are we? Are we at war with the Soviets? Are we at war with the Taliban? Are we at war with the Americans and NATO? Who are we allied with? All of that stuff goes into how they've organized themselves to survive. And that behavior is learned and passed on. And it's going to take a while for that behavior to be unlearned, if you will. The other thing with it is that all of these folks, some to a greater extent, and some to a lesser extent, may wind up exhibiting symptoms or signs of what we normally call post-traumatic stress, because they've been living in an active war zone, right, for over 40 years. Now, there's a couple of other points that I want to make just to tie this together really quick. Afghans are high context communicators across almost all the various ethno-national and ethno-linguistic groups. It means they're not always direct about what they want. It means they'll often talk around a problem, if you will. So the result is that, you know, we tend to get to the point. What's the point here? What's the point of the meeting? What's the point of the social event? Whatever. It may not be as clear cut with those folks. The other thing to keep in mind is that they are polychronic in general. When we deal with specific humans, it's not necessarily the same, right? But at a sort of societal level, they're polychronic. What does that mean? They don't manage or organize time the way we do. We're monochronic, right? This event goes from 6 to 7 or 7:15 or 7:30 when we finish. And when it's done, some of us will go to the next event or the next thing on our schedule, right? For people who are polychronic, all sorts of things happen all at the same time. And you just have to keep that in mind with dealing with them, right? Finally, right, as Sylvia talked about, you're going to see varying degrees of education and literacy, as well as varying degrees of being comfortable with sort of what we would think of as Western or American ways of doing things, depending on who in the families we've dealt with, who in the family is educated to what level, and things like that. And that, I think, is where I'm going to leave it and turn it back over to Cindy.
Okay, I think we had one question for you, Adam. What is the behavior, specific behavior that you're referring to?
I'm not sure what, okay, so if the person who asked the question could perhaps be slightly more specific in where, in what part of this, the behavior that the question arose from.
It just came up when you were talking about the different cultural considerations.
Okay, so if the question is about organization, differential social organization, basically what it means is that you are likely to see behaviors that to us will seem very odd in relation to things like authority figures or how official processes should work, right? Remember, we tend to think, I mean, not that the American society doesn't have its own corruption and graft and things like that, but usually if you get pulled over, you know, for a speeding violation, usually, right, the cop isn't expecting money to let you go, right? That may not necessarily be the experience with folks coming from different parts of Afghanistan, depending on who was doing the security and how it was being done at the local level. You know, their interaction with like law enforcement may be to expect that something has to be paid. They may have a distrust, for instance, depending on where they're from, of education systems or of formal healthcare and medical systems, governmental systems. All of this is because they've organized themselves to survive where those systems weren't regularized, weren't standardized, weren't routine. There was no sort of, you know, news media or press to try to spread sunshine on things. It was basically, you know, this local person X controls area Y, and therefore everything has to be done through that person. So who's the fixer, right? That's what I mean by differentially socially organized. They're what you may look at and see as a behavior and go like, I don't understand that behavior, right, at all. Right, it may seem perfectly logical to them from their context. Just to tie it together really quickly and perhaps make this make a little more sense. This concept itself comes to us from the study of crime and delinquency, specifically that certain what are considered to be maladjusted or maldeveloped or poorly organized urban areas, if you will, have high degrees of crime and deviance and delinquency. The differential social organization tells us that it's not so much that they're badly organized or you know, people there are just primed for deviance and delinquency. It's that these are logical adaptations to the social and economic and political environments they live in. In other words, these adaptations have developed to allow people to survive. If for instance, you know, if there's no chance of making money in the licit economy or the legal economy, it makes perfect sense that people are working in the black market or the illegal economy doing what we would think of as illegal things. That's where the concept comes from, but it's very applicable when trying to talk about how people who've come from disorganized states, failing states, conflict zones understand the world.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've had a couple more questions that I think between Adam and Sylvia, they'll be answered in the next couple slides because it touches on how that works with our volunteers. So Sylvia, do you want to talk about the work?
Yeah, go ahead. So definitely, thank you, Dr. Silverman. And I could listen to you forever. And I'm glad that we found you. And you know, this is relevant. And we've seen some of what you early on, before we started resettling Afghan refugees, you had this presentation and training with us. And then now I'm starting to see some of the stuff you're talking about, especially around the way the communication, you know, Americans are very direct communicators, and then sort of the communication is sort of a roundabout way. Especially we're seeing a lot of the trauma and sort of people not being able to put a finger on what they've experienced around their trauma and sort of displacing their feelings around everything that we're doing. And so I just don't know if people know that we can provide services for no less than 30 days, but no more than 90 days. Every single one of these Afghan individuals who will be resettled will be served for at least 30 days, 32 days, 33 days, and expected to become self-sufficient. We as an agency have historically worked with individuals up to 90 days because just try to be as ethical as possible and find another program where we can plug them into. But with this being a real humanitarian crisis, we're having to work with people for less time so that we can move on to the next family because we have high numbers. As you can see in the chart, this is the flow of the services that we provide. I won't read those off to you because I know that you all can follow along. But another thing that people don't know is that every individual is only given $1,025. That's it, not revolving, not recurring, not every month, one time, which they must pay back in a loan to the International Organization for Migration within 6 months of their arrival. So that's something that the general community doesn't know. Since we're talking about Afghan refugees, and many of them have served as contractors, either some have worked in the media, some were human rights activists, some were contractors, many of them are highly skilled. And so we are looking for employers in the community. We are looking, and so that'll be the next slide, if you don't mind, Cindy. Housing continues to be the #1 challenge, and we're not asking anyone to pay for the housing or give free housing. We have the funding to make sure that the housing for individuals is paid for until they can start working and pay for themselves. We just need landlords to work with us and, allow for us to place folks there. So I talked a little bit about employers. If you know someone you have a business and you want to, connect with us, please do. Additionally, we're going to start having conversations in the near future about co-sponsorship groups, what they're calling in many communities as welcoming circles, where from the moment that someone arrives through the entire process, there are some parts that we will do as an agency because they're highly we'll do, but we're going to be having conversations about how can we get with some faith organizations, some of the temples, to create these welcoming circles, these co-sponsors. So stay tuned for that. And then the other thing that we, as I said, we rented a storage unit, which is amazing, and donations for things that folks need, and mentors. Mentors is the biggest thing, and it's not someone to do case management, it's someone to really help someone figure out the way of, the ways of Florida or the ways of the Tampa Bay area. It's helping someone understand the bus system, helping someone, just mentor someone. So that's another thing, another area. I think Cindy's going to jump in and talk a little bit about ways that you all can get involved and maybe do some follow-up, and we can provide you with the materials to do that. So Cindy, if you want to talk about the Shabbat, that would be great.
So one of the things, we provide speakers. So can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, move to the next slide though.
So Refugee Shabbat is scheduled to be March 4th and 5th. It is a national week where they would like as many congregations around the US to hold a Shabbat that focuses on refugees and the life that they're leading now. Highest on their website has some suggested readings and study guides and things that can be incorporated into the services. And we are happy as an agency to provide speakers, not only for the Shabbat, but anytime. If you wanted to do a presentation at your synagogue or in your social group or civic group. We have staff that can come and speak. Sylvia can come and speak. Maybe I could come and speak. I don't know. But we also have refugees that go out and speak, that will go out and talk about their experiences and what it's like to be here in the U.S. and, you know, some of their experiences of leaving their countries. That most of them, you know, they would like nothing better than to go back or be able to have stayed in their country. It just wasn't safe for them. We are looking at doing some welcoming circles, and again, any kind of info sessions that we can do to help you. Please reach out to Sylvia or myself, or just send a message to our Gulf Coast website, and we will make sure it gets to the right people.
Hannah, can you put the link in the chat so that folks who want to sign up for more information can click on the link and sign up to get more information on? I know there's been a lot of interest on the welcome circles, particularly from several of the temples. And so definitely would love to follow up with folks on that. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Right, and everybody, we did this came together really quickly, and it came together because we had a lot of interest, people calling us, people sending us emails saying, what can we do to help? And, you know, it started with the airlifts, you know, what can they do? And as our staff went from about 3 people to, I don't know how many people you have on the ground now, Sylvia, but, you know, you can imagine going from resettling, you know, 69 people in a year to, you know, 500, 600 people on the plan, and quickly. So it's, you know, it's a big effort on our part. And we said, let's put together a town hall and answer questions and talk about what we do, and hopefully get everybody excited about what they can do to help. It's not just about donations. It's about help. It's about, if you have a place that they could live, even temporarily, that would be fantastic. If you have jobs that they can get, we're trying to, a lot of these folks are educated, and we're trying to get them jobs in their fields so they can get certified in the US. You know, we have somebody today, Sylvia told me about, you know, in Sarasota, we have somebody who's just a pediatrician and 2 doctors in the family. They can't work here in that field until they get certified in the US to do that. So we're trying to help that along and find, you know, relative jobs for them to do. So anything you can do to help is appreciated by us and by the refugees.
Thank you. And I saw that Hannah did put that in the chat, so I don't know if folks were able to grab that. I see a lot of chat going on. Liza, I've spoken to you in the past. Thank you for being here. Jessica, I've spoken to you in the past as well. So this is really good to see that folks are getting information from Adam. Adam, you're such a source of great information. Thank you for that. And so if you do want to be in contact with Adam, you can reach out to us, and we'll, you know, figure out how to get you in contact with him. If you need to reach me, my email is on the screen. Cindy's is, and Rabbi Weintraub. And thank you, Rabbi, for opening our session. And everyone, thank you, Cindy. It was really your idea to have a town hall, and I really appreciate you so much. You always have the heart of refugees at the front of your heart. Thank you.
Well, as Rabbi said, we were all refugees at one time. You know, my family came over mostly from Russia and Poland in the early 1900s, but it is something that we have all experienced somewhere in our history. So again, I thank everybody. If you have any questions that weren't answered here, if you want to put them quickly in the chat, or just send us an email and we will reach back out to you. But again, thank you. Thank both federations for co-sponsoring this and helping to promote it in the community, and getting something out quickly is not always in our DNA. So it was really great that this literally came together in less than 2 weeks. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for participating.
Thank you, Hannah, for being behind the scenes and making the artwork and running the background such last minute. Thank you, Hannah. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, everyone.